It is our pleasure to be joined by a man that has been on a meteoric rise in the NFL draft scouting space. Matt Miller from ESPN is in the house. Is it so weird now that I like Matt Miller from ESPN, man? That has that
Yes,
gotten
it's weird. Yeah, my friends still mess with me. Like if I hang out with them, they'll be like, "Oh, Matt Miller, ESPN." I'm like, "Guys, stop! Like, come on, like stop that." So yeah, it's still weird. It's probably like like when you play in high school, like you were both standout high school players, and you kind of get known as that guy, and then you're like, "Oh my god, like they're all Americans at Oklahoma," and then oh my god, they're NFL players. So you kind of go from that like. If you went and hung out with your buddies from high school, they still think of you just like the dude they played high school ball with, and they're like, wait, he played in the NFL, and he was one of the best college players of his era. So not that I'm on your guys' level. I'm not not putting myself in the Teddy Lehman, Gabe Ikard stratosphere, but it's still weird for sure.
The better you do, the harder time you get from your friends, right?
Yes, or they did you guys ever get that where they just like the waitress comes around at the end of the night after you've been out with the boys, and she's like, "So is this one check?" And they just all kind of look at you like, "Hey, you were just on that TV, buddy. You're paying for these beers."
your
So
your face is
that's
on
when you know,
TV? That's funny. All
right?
right, man. I know you are super busy this time of the year, so let's jump into the OU guys before we talk kind of some of the bigger questions in this draft overall. How do you see Anton Harrison? Do you think he's a guy that we could possibly see go in round one if there's a run on tackles early in the draft?
Yeah, definitely. I think it would be in that like late 20s range. You could probably start at Dallas at 26. You say somewhere Dallas to Kansas City wouldn't even surprise me. I know they signed Jawan Taylor. He's a traditionally right tackle. We'll see what they actually do. It wouldn't surprise me just because I think after Peter Skoronski from Northwestern, after Paris Johnson, Ohio State, Roderick Jones, Georgia, Darnell Wright, Tennessee, and Darnell's a right tackle only. There's I think a conversation about who's the next best tackle, and Anton could definitely be in that. He's very athletic, he's very good in the run game, plays really well out in space. I think the biggest question is just play strength. Can he? Obviously, you can get stronger. Will he get stronger at the next level so that he can hold up a little bit better when he's in the trenches, not so much as a move blocker? So it would not shock me if someone said, "Yeah, the upside here is tremendous. Let's take him. We got the 5 years now in order to mold him into a professional offensive tackle."
You mentioned the upside. It's kind of interesting, and I don't know if this is necessarily a positive. It's not really negative, but he's young. He's only 21, and like when you kind of compare the beginning of last season to the end of last season, and kind of what he did in the Senior Bowl and some of those other things, it's like he's kind of fresh playing elite. So there's not a whole lot of elite film there. So is that how he's viewed, kind of almost as a project, a little bit more than some of these other guys?
Yeah, Teddy, I think a work in progress. The one good thing is he hasn't learned a lot of bad habits yet because he is so young. And I've talked to one offensive line coach about Anton specifically, and I'm stealing his phrasing. He doesn't have a lot of bad habits. So they mentioned play strength has got to get better. Core strength has probably got to get better to, hold up against some of those bull rushes and stuff. But, there's so, 2 years, I think, of starting experience. So there's a lot of room for him to grow. And again, the athletic foundation is in place. So he's not a guy where you would look at him and say, well, he's got short arms, or, oh my gosh, he's so athletically deficient that you're starting to think about maybe we put him on the other side. Maybe we try to, kick him inside to cover up lack of movement. That's not there on his tape. So I do think that helps him, is that you got a young player. The Big 12 is always going to get knocked for defense. You could say, okay, well, he didn't go against great defensive ends, but like TCU's got a couple of pretty good defensive ends. K-State's got a pretty good defensive end. So he I think was a little more battle tested than he's been given credit for.
Looking at Marvin Mims, has had a very good pre-draft process, right? Burns the 40 at the combine. Probably, I think undoubtedly a day two guy, but
Yeah.
where do you see Marvin fitting in the league? Like, how do you view his role, and where do you think he may come off the board?
Yeah, I think his role is really easy to define because of his size. He's going to get typecast as an inside player. I do think he has shown enough speed and ability to separate the line of scrimmage despite being small that you could envision him playing in an outside role a little bit depending on the team that he goes to. But I mean, we're talking about one of the most productive high school players ever at wide receiver, especially in the state of Texas. Someone who immediately got to OU, was productive. I think the hard thing is, where do you slot him in? Because it is a very deep class of small wide receivers. There's not a lot of big dudes in this class. So there are a lot of guys that play a lot like Mims. And I think I had a conversation on Twitter maybe last week with someone, and they were asking about him. I said, the feedback you get from teams is the play strength is really, really poor. He's going to struggle against press. He's going to struggle to win contested catches, but he's so slippery in space. And he's a good route runner. We've seen wide receivers come out of that scheme and have NFL success. So it's not like he's, completely out on an island here, but it sounds like it might be more round 3 than round 2, which does surprise me. I think there's going to be players drafted ahead of him that didn't have their production, maybe didn't have, a similar 40 time or a similar combine performance. But I think I like him more than a lot of the people in the NFL do that I talk to. And maybe that's because it's easier to find. When you're scouting for 32 teams, it's easier to find a role for a guy, whereas if you're scouting specifically for the Dallas Cowboys, you might say, we kind of got a guy like that already. So, he's lower on our board, but I find a lot of fits for him. If you're the Buffalo Bills, Stephon Diggs, the last time we saw him play, he's yelling at the quarterback. Gabe Davis is good for a drop or 2 a game. If you can get Marvin Mims at the bottom of 2, if you're Buffalo, I think he's immediately your third best receiver and somebody that puts another dynamic in your offense.
This is more of a general question, but I think it ties in pretty good with Mims. It's just kind of seems like an observation, and I don't know what the data says. I feel like size at wide receiver is not nearly as big of a factor as it used to be. And maybe it's because of you can't get blown up over the middle like you used to. And maybe, you can't get hand checked and stuff down the field. Is that something that you've seen? Does that check out?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also teams in the NFL are starting to adapt to spacing. They just want to get athletes out in space. It's a little bit like the college game. The NFL actually followed that of, let's find a way to get these fast guys the ball out in space. I think, Philadelphia does a really good job of that with Devonta Smith. Kansas City, obviously, some kind of an architect of that as well. I think San Francisco plays their guys tight, but it's all about, hey, let's get them the ball on the go. And so I think you can have smaller wide receivers have success. And so it's all about, and one of these days this is going to happen, and it's going to change football when scouting and coaching get on the same page, and the scouts say, hey, here's what Marvin Mims is good at, here's what he's not good at, and the coaches say, cool, we're just going to ask him to do the stuff he's good at then, because he's really good at it, so we'll just do that. We'll run some vertical stuff, we'll kind of get some spacing, go on some combo routes so that maybe he's not getting pressed at the line of scrimmage a ton. We're going to do some pre-snap motion, and we're going to just let this dude fly. If those two sides of the building ever talk, we're in for just a monumental change. Whoever does it first is going to be, it'll be like the New England Patriots in the 2000s.
That's so good. All right, a couple more OU guys. Yeah. A couple more OU guys. Eric Gray, very productive season in 2022.
Yeah.
And then you look at Wanye Morris, has the measurables, probably doesn't have the consistency on tape that you're looking for. When you look at Eric and Wanye, who do you think is going to come off the board first between those two guys?
Ooh. Man, I'm going to take Wanye. I actually am a fan of his, and I don't know that I was in season, but post-season film study, I became a bigger fan, and I think there's obviously swing tackle versatility. I think he could play either side, but man, he moves really well for a powerful dude. He moves really well. So, like you said, there's I think inconsistent tape. There's an injury question mark as well, but I'm a fan of his and think that he could be a starting right tackle in the NFL. Maybe not rookie year, but I think you're looking at him of like, dude, this guy could be a starter in the pros. And there are a lot of good teams that need a right tackle. Kansas City Chiefs, San Francisco 49ers are the two that come to mind immediately, that they're probably not going to spend a first round pick on a guy, but if it's round 3 and you're getting into those compensatory picks, I think that's a really good range for him. So I'll take Wanye. Eric Gray, 4-star running back, stud coming right out of high school, goes to Tennessee, has an impact. Transfers to OU, has an impact. So the production's great. I worry about the mileage a little bit. And I think in this running back class, what we're going to find is there are a lot of dudes that are really similar. There's a lot of those guys that are like sub 6 foot, sub 215, who are quick, like they're shifty. They got a little bounce to their game. And Gray fits into that mold. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to see guys who have, a little bit less mileage on their tires like a Dwayne McBride, from UAB as a player who's probably going to go ahead of Eric Gray, even though Eric did it at Tennessee and Oklahoma. He's got the pedigree, but some of these other guys are a little bit more fresh coming out of college, and I think that's going to help.
How about Braden Willis? Played a huge role in Oklahoma's offense, tight end,
Yeah.
H-back guy, did all kinds of stuff, split out, was a ISO blocker on the inside. I mean, he did all kinds of stuff, even took snaps at quarterback for Oklahoma.
Right.
What do you think about Braden Willis? I mean, I know he doesn't stick out really in size and athleticism, but the guy can do a little bit of everything.
Man, I just finished writing up my notes on him last night. I try to get like 60 seconds of talking points about every player, just for television purposes. And I love Braden Willis. I wish fullbacks were still a thing, and I do think he'll find a role in the NFL because, like you mentioned, Teddy, he can play everywhere. I mean, he played Wildcat quarterback. You move him all over. So I think I wrote in my notes he's like the Taysom Hill of fullbacks. It's just you're going to find a spot for him. He's going to play special teams for you. So I do think he'll get drafted. It might be round 5, 6. Because as you said, like the athletic profile doesn't wow you, but he had a great Senior Bowl week. And that was really like the top line of my notes was, hey, like, remember how much you loved this guy at the Senior Bowl because he caught the ball so well. Watching him in pass pro, like he's working his tail off, in one-on-one drills. And really, like, they put him in some uncomfortable situations where it wasn't stuff that he was asked to do consistently, like, blocking space like you're essentially a fullback. He handled that so well. And then you add in, what he does as a short area receiver. I think we're starting to see, and you guys will love this, the game go back to like a little bit more power football because you got 215-pound linebackers and 7 DBs out there. It's like, hey, we're just going to load up and run the ball at you, a lot like Philly did last year. So I think a smart team is going to grab Braden Willis, and he's going to play for 12 years because he can do so many different things.
How crazy is this quarterback thing going to get in this draft, Matt?
I can't figure it out. I will be completely honest with you guys because we've been friends a long time. Right before I came on with you, I was texting a scout friend. We've been friends since I started in like 2011, and he's plugged in. He knows a lot. And I was like, okay, Bryce Young is going first. I think we all feel really, really good about that. We have no one knows what's going to happen at 2. Until Adam Schefter says it, I don't think I'm going to believe that anyone actually knows what's going to happen at 2 because who knows what's, in Houston, you've got an owner that's very involved in Cal McNair. You got a GM in Nick Caserio who's on his 4th head coach. How much power does he still have left? And then you got a legend in D'Amico Ryans coming in as head coach, and he's bringing all his San Francisco buddies. I don't know who's making the pick. So if we knew who kind of had control of the card, you might be able to say, okay, like, D'Amico could say, hey, I played at Alabama and was pretty good. There's this Alabama defensive end that's pretty good. We'll just start there. But if it's the owner, they could say, we need a face of the franchise. We need a quarterback. And they could take CJ Stroud. So it is and I'm not saying this just because like ESPN televises the draft and people are going to watch whether we know who the number 2 pick is or not. But there is legitimate intrigue about what will happen. And I thought the draft would start at 3 with the Arizona Cardinals. It doesn't. Like, it starts at 2 with Houston because I can't find anyone in Houston or outside of Houston who will say confidently what they're doing.
The last thing I've got is Anthony Richardson. I have no idea what's going to happen with this guy. The measurables are absolutely insane, but the evaluation is all over the map from guys, and understandably so. Yep. Where do you think he gets drafted? What do you think of his chances in the NFL? Like, what's he going to turn into?
I think he could go anywhere from 3 to 11, which I know is a gigantic range, but we'll see if somebody gets, antsy and trades up for a quarterback. A lot depends on what happens at number 2 if CJ Stroud goes there. Anthony has an unlimited ceiling. I mean, if in 3 years we're talking about he's on the level with Mahomes and Burrow, Josh Allen, if he's up there, I will not be shocked at all. If in 3 years we're talking about him struggling as a starter, I still wouldn't be surprised. I think the situation matters. And I find it interesting. A lot of people say he's only played 13 games. He needs to sit. I remember saying this about Trey Lance, who played about 13 games in college. I was like, my guy doesn't need to sit. He needs to play football. Like the only way to get better at football is to play football. So I think for Anthony, it should be similar to Josh Allen. And I don't know if people forget how rough that first year was for Josh in Buffalo, where he's like throwing passes into the stands at times. But Anthony needs to get out there and play. And the only way I think to learn is to dive all in. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so, get out there and play, and it's gonna be a bumpy road, but to me, and I mean, you guys can speak to this at a much better level than I can. I think the only way to get better at football is to play football.
That is something we agree on. Now, I think one of the most entertaining things in the draft, or something that people are very interested in, is the guy that's going to go earlier than people think, and then the guy that's going to go later than people think. Do you have a guy or two that you think could maybe be available longer than people think, and then a guy that may go earlier than a lot of people think?
Yeah, I think Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech to stay in our little neck of the woods he could go 3 to the Arizona Cardinals, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. He has a lot of fans because the size, the measurables, pass rush win rate was actually higher than Will Anderson. So there's a lot of analytics that say Tyree Wilson is going to be a dude. It's a lot like Travon Walker going over Aiden Hutchinson last year, where you're talking about where they'll be at the end of their rookie contract, not where they are right now. So he would be my go earlier. Go later. Gosh, there are so many of them. I think Will Levis could fall a little bit. That's the one I have a hard time with. If he doesn't go 4 to the Indianapolis Colts, I have a really hard time finding a spot for him because there's not a lot of excitement. And that might mean that the team that likes him is just being really quiet right now, and they're not shouting it from the rooftops to guys like me. But it's getting harder to find a spot for Levis. So 4 to the Colts, maybe 7 to the Raiders, but after that, it's like, I don't know that Will Levis and Mike Vrabel are the kind of guys that are going to get along because they're both, kind of type A, kind of hard headed guys. Maybe that's exactly what Will Levis needs is Mike Vrabel. But after that, it gets tough, man.
All right, last one, rapid fire. Cowboys at 26, Chiefs at 31. If you were in those spots with what those rosters are right now, who are you taking for each of those teams? A lot of fans of those teams listen to this pod.
Yeah, so I would take Michael Mayer, the tight end from Notre Dame. But if I'm the Dallas Cowboys, it's Jason Witten all over again. Like, it's just the guy doesn't drop a ball ever. Great blocker, and you let Dalton Schultz walk, which I think was a good decision. 31 Kansas City. I'm going to go wide receiver. I think Quentin Johnston from TCU. I'm not intentionally picking Big 12 guys here, I promise. But I think Quentin Johnston gives them something they don't have. 6'3". The pro day time was a little slow. He's a 4.4 guy. There's some focus drops on tape, but I think that's a timing issue more than a hands issue. So give Mahomes that big target over the top. You got speed all over the place. Give him a big target down the field.
Matt, you're the man. I would dive into how good Malik Murphy looked in Texas's spring game if we had time, but I know you got to go, man. You're the best.
Yeah. Appreciate you guys. Hey, I'll come back on in May and we'll break down that spring game. I'm ready.
There we go. All right. See you, Matt.
See you guys.